You know, it's crazy to believe that, I believe it was June 5th, the Nintendo Switch 2 dropped. It has already been a year, and it's been about a year since I got it. I got it about a month after it came out, and I gotta say, it's been an experience, right? From my initial point of view to now, do you think a lot of stuff has changed? You think I was one of the people who maybe have had a doom and gloom perspective? Or maybe I was optimistic? Well, it's a little more nuanced, and I'll explain right here in my 1 year experience with the Nintendo Switch 2. Now let's get one thing out the way, right? This isn't about comparing to like a Steam Deck or a PS5 or an Xbox Series X or saying one's the best and one's the option you should go to. No. Personally, as a gamer, as someone who's been gaming since I was a kid, I believe get every console you can if you can. You know, don't break the bank trying to get all the games, but don't sell yourself short by sticking to one or two brands. It makes no sense. And Nintendo's not any different. Now, there was a lot of hate going towards Nintendo. Now they seem to be heading towards PlayStation. And I noticed that at the launch, everyone was worried about what's the power like? What's the battery life like? Is there even gonna be games? And after a year, I think I nailed it. And I think I finally have my full experience wrapped up. And we're gonna dive in now. So let's start with the most important part, right? For nerds, the specs. You'll notice that the Nintendo Switch 2 is powered by a custom NVIDIA Tegra T239 processor built on an Ampere architecture. I don't know what that means, but it sounds nice and fancy. Now, there's a secret weapon this thing has, right? It has full hardware support for NVIDIA's DLSS, its deep learning super sampling, which also provides ray tracing and just better visuals all around without really sacrificing power. You also get it packed with about 12 gigs of DDR5 RAM. I believe 9 is dedicated to games, which is a big jump because the original Nintendo Switch only had about 3, maybe 4. And then you also have a bigger amount of storage, which this one comes with 256 gigs of UFS 3.1 internal storage out of the box, and you can still expand it with a memory card. So much better than the original Switch. And I gotta say, the power of this thing actually surprised me, especially when you think about it, right? It's only as strong as about maybe a PS4, maybe a PS4 Pro. But the technology behind it is more modernized, so that's how you're able to get even better graphics and gameplay than you would on a PS4 because of something such as NVIDIA's DLSS. Even though the raw output of power is weaker, the advanced technology behind it allows for some really great tricks when it comes to playing some great games. Now, how about the screen, right? So the original Switch, I believe, was what, a 7-inch screen? This one is an 8-inch screen, and you may not think it sounds like a big difference until you put it side by side, because oh my God, my original Switch looked tiny compared to this. But it's not just the size of the screen that makes it so impressive. It actually has a 120 hertz variable refresh rate, and that's in handheld mode. Now, if you have a TV that also has variable refresh rate and go up to 120 hertz, you're also going to reap those benefits. So certain games, not a lot, but a few, will actually play, run, and look so much better. The reason why I do love the variable refresh rate is a game like, let's say, Cyberpunk. It's very taxing, therefore it cannot hit 60 frames per second. So it does max out at 40 when it's on performance mode. Now, if you only had a 60 hertz screen that can go up to 40, because of the difference in the refresh rates, it will look a little choppy, a little messy. But because it's variable, it can actually handle 40 way better, and it looks more smoother and just easier on the eyes. It's not a big difference, but it is noticeable when you jump from a screen that doesn't have variable refresh rate to one that does. And you would also think that because this isn't an OLED panel, it would be a major downgrade compared to the Switch 1 or the Switch OLED. But I gotta say, even comparing to a Switch OLED, I had to look at it next to my buddy's OLED. I only have the original Switch. It looks amazing. It still is really clean, really crisp. You still get really deep blacks, although they're not going to be as good as the OLED. And of course, you might get a little extra power draw. But I have been extremely happy with this screen, to the point where I don't really miss the idea of an OLED screen. The blacks are black enough. It's bright enough. I will say, if you want a quick tip, get a matte screen protector. Yes, you might lose some of that glossy clarity, but if you ever play in a bright or highly lit area, it's going to look and feel so much better. And they're cheap. They're not really pricey at all. Plus, protect your investment. Protect that screen. Now, like I said, that handheld screen is great, but it's also amazing when you put it to a bigger screen. Like I said, you can get 120 hertz, 4K resolution, variable refresh rate, HDR compatible. Almost everything you can want out of a gaming screen, right? So it is a full-fledged console. When I do play a lot of games docked. Now the screen, even though that's the part you're looking at the most, the second most important thing of a gaming, handheld gaming console next to the screen you're playing on has to be ergonomics. Now in hand feel, I gotta say, it's a mixed bag, right? It is much bigger than the Switch 1. Therefore, it is more comfortable for somebody who is older, more mature, or has bigger hands like me. But it still is very skinny, and there is no real curve for where your hand goes. It still doesn't have the most ergonomic shape, but it's not as uncomfortable as the original Switch. And it's still light despite its much bigger size, which just impressed me. I thought it'd be something that's heavy to lug around. So ergonomically, it is an improvement, but it's still not where it needs to be. It needs better hand grips. It needs to just fit better. Now, I was a little worried with the magnetic Joy-Cons, but honestly, after using them for a year, I don't think about them. I don't worry about them coming off. They are very well made, and they seem to only come off when I want them to without much fiddling around or much fight. It's a frictionless experience, and that's the key word when it comes to Nintendo Switch 2 is a frictionless experience. Why do I say that? Because we're going to talk about the third, honestly, number one when it comes to a gaming console, but the third aspect of it is the gaming. See, one of the biggest problems a lot of people have with the Nintendo Switch when it came out with the Switch 2 is the fact that there was not a lot of games. You can get Mario Kart, which is the one I got. It came bundled. That was like $450, $500. And then you had, there was like another Mario game, I think, and Cyberpunk. There was very few games you could really get on the Switch 2. And that was a problem. Thankfully, my idea was I was going to play my games from the Switch 1 and have them run better. Now, here is one of my favorite things about the gaming, right? That was my idea, and it did not work out that way because a lot of older games were running on handheld mode, which means they were dropping down to like 720p or 544p resolution on a bigger screen. And I don't know if you know how resolution works, but if you take few pixels and you make the screen bigger, because they're getting stretched out, it looks blurry and just unattractive. So a lot of games were still running as if they were running on a Nintendo Switch 1, but looking worse because of the blurriness. So what did Nintendo do like 6 months in that changed the game for me? They released boosted mode, which basically tricks Nintendo Switch 1 games into thinking they are being ran in dock mode when you play on handheld on Nintendo Switch 2. Now, it does draw a little bit more battery, but the results are amazing, and games look the way they're supposed to. Usually they're hitting about 1080p and 60 frames per second because it increases the wattage, which increases the power output, allowing the games to run to their full capability as if you have a regular Nintendo Switch docked. But this time it's on your Switch 2. So that was a game changer for me, especially when I was going through my backlog. But even with that, playing Cyberpunk on my Nintendo Switch, which is hilarious because I own it on my PS5 and my PC, it's one of my favorite games, so I needed it on the go. But it looks amazing. It plays so well. And it's a Switch 2 game that looks like modern games. Now, obviously, the graphics are dropped down, but it still looks like Cyberpunk. It doesn't look like a cheap version of Cyberpunk. It looks like you just dropped the settings on your PC down. There's also Hades 2, which I was addicted to Hades 1 on my regular Switch. I still am, and now I'm addicted to Hades 2. That game is just beautiful. I've been playing some demos, like I got to play the Star Fox demo, which is technically amazing. It's just not my style of game. Donkey Kong Bonanza. The Switch 2 has such a full library, and I gotta give a shout out to Capcom as well as Squaresoft because they've been holding up the third-party crown when it comes to Nintendo Switch 2. Capcom is doing amazing work. I was playing the Resident Evil demo, and a Switch game in handheld mode should not look and run like that. There is no way that game was on a Switch 2, and it was. And it looks beautiful. Like, I can play the whole game from a Switch 2 and not feel like I'm missing out on the experience. And that's what I love. And that's the Nintendo Switch's best strength is now that the dev kit's out to these developers, they are mastering the console. Now, there is a few downsides, right? The battery is not the best. If you're playing a game like Cyberpunk or Resident Evil, those high-end Switch 2 games, you're probably looking at about 2 or 3 hours of uninterrupted gameplay. Switch 1 games are going to run better and longer, but it is a bit of a battery hog. That's the only downside. Thankfully, you probably shouldn't be playing your games out on the go like for 2 or 3 hours as it is. Like, get some work done. What are you doing? No, just kidding. Because I can easily sit down on the couch for like 5 hours playing Hades, so I can't even judge. It gets annoying. Thankfully, it does charge pretty quickly. Standard USB-C, and the dock charges fast. So that's the biggest downside. But I think that's something that you get with any major handheld gaming console is weaker battery life because these games are so powerful and require so much technology to run behind them that we're seeing it just become harder to run without just nuking the battery. So at the end of the day, how has my experience been? This is going to be the breakdown, right? My favorite thing about the Switch is the games. And not just the games, but how frictionless it is. You see, I thought about getting a Steam Deck, right? Or the Lenovo Legion Go. But there's a problem with those things. They're basically portable PCs, which mean you're going to do a lot of tinkering and messing around. I no longer want to sit and spend 15 to 30 minutes trying to adjust every little setting so I can go and play a game. The beautiful thing about the Nintendo Switch is, out the box, you're forced to play that system as it is. It doesn't matter if the graphics are lower or if the game doesn't run at 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second or has HDR. No, because you're going to play the game as is. You're going to pop the game in, launch it, and start playing. It's a frictionless environment. And that also makes me, as a gamer, learn to stop focusing on the graphics or the fidelity or the frame rates. It actually just makes me go back to those old school days of when I was a kid and I just wanted to enjoy the game as is. Frictionless gaming, frictionless enjoyment of your hobbies is something the Nintendo Switch absolutely nails. I know there's a whole debate about consoles versus PC. Well, that's the console's strength. It's frictionless. You just buy the software and pop it into the hardware and it runs without you having to do anything. The PC I love because I can tinker when I am in the mood to, but I don't always want that. And especially the type of games that are on the Nintendo Switch, I really don't want to. So that's why I think the whole arguments that we saw in the past about getting the Steam Deck instead, it was a little misguided because you're not buying a Nintendo Switch because you want the best graphics or the fastest frame rate. You're buying a Nintendo Switch because you want the most frictionless, enjoyable version of gaming you can get. You want to play a lot of games with Mario and Yoshi, and you're kind of probably an adult who doesn't have that much time. And with that being said, the Nintendo Switch 2, especially now with the prices increasing for all these consoles and gaming parts, it's one of the best values in gaming. Not just because of how well it plays the games, but because of how well it blends into your life and how much it respects your time. So yeah, my year with Nintendo Switch 2 has been absolutely amazing. Do I wish there were a few more shooters or fighting games? Yeah, Street Fighter 6, as much as I'm a big Street Fighter fan, it's not doing it for me as much as like 5 did, or even 4. 4 was one of my favorites. But we got Guilty Gear, and we have games like Onimusha coming out, and James Bond. We have AAA third-party games, and they're running very well on the Switch, making it one of the most frictionless and enjoyable consoles you can get. As long as you stop thinking about it. That's the trick. There's a little bit of you that has to work on that. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you enjoy your Nintendo Switch 2 or if you're waiting for like an OLED version. And please, jump it in the comments. Please, like, subscribe, hype this video up, and make sure that you can see a lot more of me because I want to see a lot more of you guys. And of course, like always, thanks for letting me talk about tech. Peace.